The morning air was still unnaturally quiet for a neighborhood usually bustling with kids on scooters and lawnmowers in the distance. A crisp breeze rustled the wind chimes on our porch, those little brass bells my daughter loved because they reminded her of fairy sounds. She was sitting alone, just outside the gate in her wheelchair, tracing circles on the pavement with her gloved fingers. She did that when she was happy, or when she thought no one was watching. Then the gate creaked open. It wasn't loud, but in that moment, it sliced through the silence like a gunshot. Karen stood there, one foot in our driveway, the other planted like a challenge on the street. Her lips were pursed into that expression we'd come to know, the one that always seemed a mix of judgment and fake concern. Except today, her eyes weren't narrowed in annoyance. They were wide, intense, almost manic. My daughter looked up and gave a nervous little smile, the kind she used when she didn't understand what was happening but sensed danger. Karen took a step forward. In her right hand, she held something wrapped in a blue cloth. It wasn't visible at first, but as she pulled the cloth away, my stomach sank. It was a handgun, not some toy, not a threat with words. A real, glinting, polished weapon. "Get out of the chair," Karen said, her voice cold, trembling slightly like she was both furious and afraid of what she herself was about to do. My daughter's hands froze mid-air. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Born with cerebral palsy and selective mutism, she hadn't said a word since she was 2. But her face, her wide, terrified eyes, screamed everything. Her mouth opened, just enough to gasp, but not enough to plead, not enough to call for me. I was still in the kitchen. I hadn't seen this unfold. Not yet, but the moment the wind shifted and I heard Karen's voice, sharp, slicing through the morning, I ran. By the time I reached the screen door, I could see Karen clearly through the mesh. The gun was now pointed at my daughter's chest. Karen's finger hovered over the trigger. "I told you people to keep her off my property," she hissed. "She's always watching, recording, spying. I know what you're doing." My daughter whimpered, her left hand reaching up instinctively like she could shield herself. But all she had were thin fingers and a padded jacket. Karen took a half step closer. The gun didn't waver. "You think you can intimidate me with your husband's job? With your cameras? She's not special. She's dangerous." I was frozen, my feet glued to the wood floor, my mind racing a million miles a second, but my body useless. And then bang. The sound cracked like thunder. A puff of smoke. A scream. No, not from my daughter, from a neighbor across the street. Birds exploded from the trees. I burst through the door, heart slamming against my ribs, ready to throw myself between Karen and my child. But by the time I reached the steps, I saw my daughter was still sitting upright, shaking, but untouched. The bullet had hit the metal pole of the wheelchair's handle, shattering a chunk of it. Just inches to the left, and it would have gone through her chest. Karen's face paled. Her hand shook now. The gun wobbled. She hadn't meant to shoot, at least not yet. But her paranoia, her obsession, her hatred had pulled the trigger before her conscience could stop her. And then she looked up, past the porch, past me, over my shoulder. She went still. Her eyes widened, not with rage this time, but with fear. Real bone-deep fear. Because standing behind me, backlit by the hallway shadows, in full military uniform, was someone she hadn't expected. Someone she had mocked, threatened, reported to the HOA a dozen times. Someone she thought she could push without consequence. It was my husband, her commanding officer, a retired U.S. Army general. He had arrived home early. She didn't know that. No one did. He'd flown in hours before schedule, silently like he always did, a habit from the field. He stepped forward slowly, not running, not shouting, just walking with the kind of deliberate control that made lesser men break. Karen lowered the gun before he even said a word. Her hand quivered violently as she realized who she had just aimed at. Not just our daughter, but his daughter, the daughter of a man trained to lead men into war. A man who had seen enough death to know how to silence chaos without ever lifting his voice. She dropped the gun. It hit the concrete with a dull clang. No one moved. No one spoke. The air was thick with tension, with the weight of something irreversible. And then he spoke. Only one sentence. But it changed everything. And in that moment, Karen realized who I was. It was supposed to be a fresh start. We moved into Crestfall Meadows 6 months ago, right after my husband officially retired from active duty. After 27 years of military life, reassignments, deployments, cold bases, and concrete walls, we thought we deserved something warmer, something safer. A place where our daughter could finally live without alarms jolting her awake or bags always half-packed. A place with backyard BBQs, tree-lined streets, and neighbors who wave good morning. At first glance, Crestfall looked perfect. The lawns were immaculate, the sidewalks smooth and wide enough for a wheelchair. The houses cookie-cutter but charming. Everything the realtor promised. The kind of neighborhood where sprinklers came on like clockwork, and you knew which kid belonged to which porch light pattern. Our daughter, Ava, loved it instantly. She was 10, but small for her age. Years of physical therapy had helped her move with confidence, but she still relied on her custom chair. The condition affected her motor coordination and speech, but not her spirit. Ava was curious, quiet, yes, but expressive in a way most people didn't understand unless they really looked. And she wanted to be understood. Every morning, she'd sit near the gate with her notebook, sketching birds or clouds or just lines that made sense to her. People would pass by and smile. Some waved. A few kids tried to talk to her. It was the kind of slow, hopeful healing we'd prayed for. Until Karen happened. Her real name was Kendra and Whitmore, but the neighborhood just called her Karen. Not even behind her back. She was proud of it, like it gave her authority. Short blonde bob, designer sunglasses, even at dusk, a tiny dog named Mr. Biscuit, and a clipboard. Always the clipboard. She wasn't on the HOA. She was the HOA. From day 2, she made it clear that we were lucky to be accepted into her street. Not because of our background, not because of Ava's wheelchair ramp, but because, as she said with a half smile, most new people don't get a chance to blend in before they start breaking the rules. What rules? Apparently, Ava sitting outside for more than 20 minutes was loitering. The ramp my husband built by hand? An eyesore. Our solar flagpole? Unpatriotic. That last one made my husband clench his jaw so hard. I thought he'd chip a molar, but he didn't respond. He never did, not directly. Years in the army taught him how to endure and observe. He'd wait. Karen, unfortunately, mistook his silence for weakness. Ava started to notice things. Her sketchbook would go missing from the porch. Her wheelchair tires found tiny nails embedded in the treads. Once, she came inside crying, not from pain but confusion. Karen had yelled at her across the street, "Stop staring at my house, freak." I wanted to march over and scream. But my husband stopped me. "Document everything," he said. "Let her hang herself with her own rope." So I did. I logged every interaction, every snide comment, every time she stood just a little too long outside our fence with that phone in her hand, pretending to talk, but clearly recording. We installed security cameras. Karen hated that. She filed 2 complaints with the HOA, 3 with the local council, and 1 noise report, even though we hadn't had music on since we moved in. She started telling people we were not who we say we are. "She's never around," she whispered about me, "and he travels too much to be a normal retiree. I've seen him cleaning a gun in the garage." Yes, he cleaned his gun. Legally. Safely. In his own garage. But to Karen, we were criminals or spies, or at least people who didn't fit the aesthetic of her perfect neighborhood. What really bothered her was Ava. She couldn't understand Ava, couldn't intimidate her, couldn't figure out why this silent, smiling little girl stared up at the sky instead of bowing to Karen's authority. "She watches me," Karen once said to me, face inches from mine, "always drawing. What is she writing down? I want to see it." That's when I knew something wasn't just off with Karen, it was dangerous. You see, the thing about narcissists is they hate when you don't give them the control they think they deserve. And Karen, well, Karen needed to feel important. But when Ava didn't play her game, didn't speak back, didn't look away, that threatened her. The neighborhood began to split. Some people politely avoided Karen. Others defended her. One woman actually told me she's just under a lot of pressure. She's grieving her dog's diabetes. What? Still, we try to keep things calm. We kept Ava close. We adjusted the ramp to match color codes. We cut the grass precisely to HOA standards. But no matter what we did, Karen kept pushing. Until 1 week before the shooting, Ava left a drawing on Karen's porch. It was a sketch of the street done in Ava's soft, crooked lines. Trees, houses, dogs, and one person, Karen, smiling. It was meant as a peace offering. She'd been practicing drawing smiles. She wanted to show kindness. Karen burned it, right on her front lawn, in front of Ava. That night, my husband filed a formal report. He went to the station himself. He also placed a military-level lock system on our doors and reinforced the windows. I remember asking him, "Are we really doing this for a suburban woman with a clipboard?" He looked at me and said, "Paranoia plus entitlement equals volatility. She's a threat, and I'm not letting her near my daughter again." I wish I could say he was wrong. I wish this had just ended with a nasty letter or a final warning. But people like Karen don't stop until they get what they want, or until they're stopped. And in our case, it took a bullet to make the neighborhood finally see what we'd been dealing with. It wasn't a single incident that made things unbearable. It was the slow, creeping decay, like mold under the wallpaper. Quiet, invisible at first, but spreading fast. Karen's behavior evolved from passive-aggressive to overt harassment. She no longer whispered accusations. She made them loudly, in public, in front of other neighbors. She'd wave her phone while Ava wheeled past, saying things like, "I'm recording you in case anything happens to my property." She'd circle our fence on foot like a patrolling guard dog, muttering about home security and suspicious behavior. We stopped leaving Ava alone in the yard. At first, it felt excessive. She was just 10. She loved drawing in the sun, watching ants crawl up the sidewalk, sketching shadows. But something about Karen's gaze, obsessive, invasive, made it feel unsafe. Ava didn't complain, but she noticed. Her drawings grew darker. Literally, more shadows, fewer smiles. Then came the incident with the garbage. One morning, a neighbor knocked on our door, holding a sealed envelope. "This was in my mailbox. Thought you should see it." Inside was a printed photo of Ava, taken from behind while she was sitting near the community park fountain. A red circle had been drawn around her head. Below it, "They're watching us." The image was grainy but clear enough. Ava's posture, her chair, her sketchbook in her lap. And someone had been close enough, brazen enough, to take it without us noticing. We knew immediately who sent it. Karen denied it, of course. When we confronted her, she feigned shock. "Why would I ever take a picture of a child? That's disgusting." But her eyes were telling. Too calm, too calculated. The next week, we found birdseed laced with something sticky and sour near Ava's wheelchair path, where she liked to feed the sparrows. Our vet friend later said it might have been coated with pepper oil. Birds wouldn't die, but they'd definitely stop coming. Karen was isolating Ava even from nature. My husband, always calm under pressure, started drawing up maps, battlefield logic applied to suburban defense. He tracked Karen's movements via our cameras. He filed local incident reports. He even created a binder with timestamps, photos, and recorded clips. "You're planning for war," I told him. He nodded. "And she's already fighting one. We just haven't fired back." Still, we tried not to escalate. For Ava's sake, we went out less. We played games indoors. We tried to make her world feel safe again. Then, one afternoon, while I was out grocery shopping, Ava asked if she could sit on the porch. My husband was in the backyard, fixing the bird feeder. He told her, "Just 10 minutes. I'll be right here." When he returned, Ava was gone. Her sketchbook was on the ground, pages torn. He sprinted to the sidewalk, heart in his throat. He called her name, but of course, she couldn't respond verbally. She had no way to yell for help. Then he heard the dog barking. Mr. Biscuit, Karen's dog, He followed the sound to the side of her house and found Ava seated stiffly in her chair, her hands shaking, tears streaking her face. Karen stood over her with a camera. She was trespassing, Karen snapped. I'm collecting evidence. She rolled into my yard on purpose. You think she's innocent, but she's manipulating everyone. My husband didn't say a word. He wheeled Ava home wordlessly. She clutched his hand the entire time. That night, he called the police, but the officer who arrived looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. It's a civil matter, he said. You can file a restraining order, but unless she physically harms the child. So we're waiting for that. I asked, until she does something irreversible? The officer shrugged. Document everything. You're already doing the right thing. It wasn't enough. The next few days passed like walking on a minefield. Every door creak made us jump. Every knock made Ava flinch. She stopped drawing, stopped eating much. She just sat, hands folded, as if trying to make herself smaller than she already was. My husband canceled his trip to Washington. Something in his gut told him the situation was spiraling. And then, just 2 days before the shooting, Karen escalated again. She began handing out flyers on bright orange paper. It read, Warning, child with surveillance device. Sketches and watches. Not registered. Parents conceal military activity. Neighborhood threat? She taped them on mailboxes, stuffed them in grocery carts, left one pinned to our door with a steak knife. A steak knife. It was no longer passive aggression. It was a warning. A promise. We contacted legal counsel. A neighbor took video of Karen placing the flyer. We filed another report. Still no arrest. No restraining order yet approved. We were trapped. That night, my husband said something I'll never forget. He looked at me across the dining table, lit only by the soft kitchen lamp, and said, If anything happens to Ava, I won't need a gun. I'll use the law, the military, the courts, but I'll move mountains, and I won't stop until everyone knows what she did. I believed him, but none of us expected what happened next. The next morning, Ava asked if she could sit outside for just a little while. The sky was clear. The wind was gentle. For a moment, we thought, maybe, just maybe, it was safe again. We said yes. We shouldn't have. It was supposed to be a peaceful morning. Blue skies, birds chirping, the kind of crisp, quiet air that gives you hope again, makes you believe that maybe things are settling. Ava had asked with a soft smile and a point toward the porch. Her way of saying, just for a little while, please. We had checked the cameras, walked the perimeter like we always did now. Nothing suspicious. Nothing alarming. Karen's car wasn't even in the driveway. So we said yes. Ava rolled out, sketchbook in her lap, a little sunflower clipped in her hair. My husband was upstairs, polishing his medals for a veterans charity event he was scheduled to appear at that night. I was in the kitchen preparing her favorite banana pancakes with chocolate chips, even though it wasn't Sunday. She deserved something sweet. The porch camera feed was open on the tablet nearby. I watched Ava sketch a blue J sitting on the power line. Then I heard it, a single footstep on gravel. My head snapped toward the screen. Karen. She wasn't wearing her usual tennis outfit or visor. She wore a loose, gray sweatshirt, hood up, and black leggings. Her sunglasses were gone. No phone. No Mr. Biscuit. Just her. And something wrapped in a blue kitchen towel. My stomach dropped. She walked slowly toward Ava, who was too focused on her sketching to notice. I called out for my husband, loud, panicked, but I was already running toward the door. On the camera, I watched Karen drop the towel. A gun. A black, full-sized semi-automatic pistol. She pointed it at Ava's chest. Everything in me froze and exploded at the same time. The world narrowed to that moment, like time folded in on itself. I remember pushing the screen door so hard it slammed into the wall, sprinting down the steps barefoot, screaming Ava's name. But I was still too far. Karen was just feet from her. I told you to stay away. Karen shouted, her voice cracking. She's spying on me. You think I don't know? She's part of something. This whole house. It's a setup. Ava flinched, raising her hands slowly, trembling. The sketchbook fell from her lap, pages fluttering like frightened birds. Karen stepped closer, hand shaking, eyes wild. She never talks. She just watches. They trained her. You think I don't see it? You think I don't know? Her finger moved to the trigger. And then bang. The shot echoed like a lightning strike across the neighborhood. The world stopped. Time fractured. A scream tore through the air, not from Ava, not from Karen, but from a neighbor's window. Someone had seen. Someone had heard. I stumbled down the porch stairs, heart beating so loud I couldn't hear my own breath. Ava was still upright, stunned, eyes wide, frozen. A metallic clang had followed the shot. The bullet had struck the aluminum handle on the back of her wheelchair, shattering it, but missing her body by inches. If Karen had flinched a little less, if Ava had leaned forward a second sooner, it would have hit her square in the chest. Karen stood still, gun still in hand, her eyes locked on the damage, her expression unreadable. And then she looked up. Her gaze shifted behind me. Her face turned pale. That's when I realized my husband was no longer upstairs. He was behind me now, calm, tall, unblinking, wearing his full dress uniform. He had put it on minutes before to check the fit for the event later that night. And now, by sheer fate, he stood there like an executioner of justice summoned by chaos. Karen's lips parted. Her hand trembled. The gun dropped from her grip and clattered on the pavement. She took a step back, breath hitching. "Gee, General," she whispered, voice cracking, as if realizing who she had just aimed at his child. He didn't say a word. He walked right past me, knelt beside Ava, and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. She was breathing fast, shaking, but unharmed. Then, slowly, he stood, turned to Karen, and finally spoke. "You've made an enemy you can't control, and justice is now a matter of protocol." Karen opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. The police sirens were already wailing in the distance. Neighbors emerged from homes. Phones out, cameras rolling. Karen just stood there, defeated, empty, mouth twitching in disbelief as the man she mocked for months stood between her and the girl she nearly murdered. I stepped forward, still shaking, and picked up the sketchbook. On the open page was the unfinished drawing Ava had been working on. It was the blue jay, perched on a wire, wings half open as if deciding whether to fly or fight. That day would make the news. Retired U.S. Army general's daughter survives shooting by HOA member. Child with disability targeted in alleged paranoia-driven attack. Karen with a gun. When suburbia turns hostile. But none of those headlines would capture the real story. The trauma, the years of microaggressions, the fear we lived with silently until it screamed through gunfire. Karen was arrested on the spot, charged with attempted murder, unlawful discharge of a weapon, endangerment of a minor, and multiple counts of harassment documented through our reports. When questioned, she insisted she had been protecting the neighborhood from a 10-year-old girl in a wheelchair. Her lawyers would later argue mental instability, but in her interrogation video, leaked weeks later, Karen didn't look unstable. She looked angry, like she couldn't believe we won, that we survived, that her control was finally over. The neighborhood wasn't quiet anymore, not in the peaceful, suburban way it once pretended to be. Not after that day, not after the sirens, the yellow tape, the media vans blocking the cul-de-sac like sharks drawn to blood. But there was a different kind of silence now, respectful, watchful, regretful. The same people who used to nod politely and say nothing when Karen ranted now crossed the street to apologize. One neighbor, a retired teacher, brought over a fruit basket with trembling hands. I should have said something," she muttered, eyes glassy. "I saw the flyers. I knew it wasn't right." Another dropped off a handwritten note. "We failed you. We failed Ava. We believed someone who spoke louder instead of someone who spoke less." My husband read each letter in silence. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't need to. His entire life was built on restraint, on control, on precision under pressure. But this, watching his daughter nearly die, was a war he hadn't trained for. It hit in ways even the battlefield never had. We stayed home for the first few weeks after the incident. Ava barely left a room. She couldn't look at the porch without flinching. Her wheelchair was replaced with a new one, but she still asked if it had armor. She didn't understand why someone hated her that much. How do you explain entitlement to a child who's only ever shown kindness? Karen's arrest made headlines, and her mugshot became internet fuel. Blogs called her weapon-wielding Karen, while news anchors debated gun laws and neighborhood safety. But inside our home, there was no media frenzy. There was only healing. There were nights when Ava would wake up screaming. She couldn't verbalize it, but she'd point to her chest, right where the bullet almost struck. And my husband would sit beside her, hand on her heart, whispering stories about the unbreakable shield every soldier learns to carry. He told her that some wars aren't fought with guns, but with courage, and she was the bravest of them all. Meanwhile, Karen was being systematically dismantled by the very systems she once weaponized. The police discovered she had no permit for the firearm. Further investigation revealed a history of complaints filed against her by previous neighbors, most ignored or buried under HOA protection. Not this time. My husband's documentation, a military-grade archive of every threat, every insult, every false report, was presented in court like a tactical dossier. Dates, times, timestamps, even screenshots of her social media rants. The judge, a decorated former Marine himself, looked over the files and said, "Ms. Whitmore, if this were a battlefield, you'd be court-martialed and dishonorably discharged." Karen tried to play the victim. She sobbed, claimed mental exhaustion, talked about property values and neighborhood aesthetics, said Ava's silence was unnerving, that she thought we were government spies sent to monitor her movements. Delusion wrapped in arrogance. Her lawyer pushed for a mental health evaluation. It came back borderline personality disorder with paranoia, but the court didn't let her off. She was declared fit to stand trial. She was charged with attempted murder of a minor with a disability, aggravated assault, criminal harassment, possession of a firearm without a permit, hate crime enhancement. Thanks to new legislative support, she took a plea deal in exchange for a reduced sentence, 12 years, with no early parole. She cried in court, not because she was sorry, because she lost. Her house was seized and sold to pay restitution. The HOA removed her name from every committee. Her name became a warning in real estate forums. Avoid Crestfall Meadows, Karen, at all costs. But the real justice wasn't legal. It was personal. It was watching Ava slowly start to draw again. First shaky lines, then familiar shapes, then colors. She drew the porch, the sun, and a little figure holding up a sunflower to the sky. When we asked who the figure was, she just smiled and tapped her own chest. One day, while my husband and I were sitting in the yard, she wheeled over and handed him a folded paper. It was a drawing of him, standing tall in uniform, cape fluttering behind him like a comic book hero. Across the top, she'd written one word in shaky, deliberate handwriting, "Protector." He didn't cry. Not then. But that night, I heard him in his office, alone, whispering a prayer he'd learned during his first deployment. A prayer not for warriors, but for peacekeepers. Our community changed after that. Cameras were installed on every streetlight, not to create paranoia, but protection. A memorial plaque was placed in the community garden, dedicated to children with disabilities and the right to live without fear. It reads, "Silence is not weakness. Stillness is not submission. Strength sometimes sits in a wheelchair." Ava is now enrolled in a gifted visual arts program. She doesn't speak often, but when she does, her words carry weight, like her father's, like someone who survived something meant to break her. And Karen? She sits in a state prison, in a small concrete room, no porch, no sunflowers, no Mr. Biscuit. She watches the news reports about school, art showcases, and disabled youth advocates being inspired by a 10-year-old girl who never screamed, never fought back, yet changed everything. I wonder if she knows the girl she tried to silence is now the voice of a movement. It was Ava who gave the world closure, not the police, not the lawyers, Not even my husband in his military uniform. It was Ava, this quiet, observant girl with a soul like sunlight, who stood before a gymnasium of strangers and made them understand something no court ruling ever could. The town had invited us to speak at the local Disability Awareness Day. My husband was supposed to take the stage. The mayor would introduce him, list his accolades, his Bronze Star, his years of service. But when the moment came, he shook his head, and he nudged Ava forward. At first, people weren't sure what was happening. A few fidgeted, confused. Was this part of the speech? Ava rolled to center stage, slow and steady. She clutched her sketchbook to her chest. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Instead, she opened the book and held up her latest drawing. A massive crowd sat in silence, watching as a projector cast the image onto the wall behind her. It was a two-panel sketch. On the left, a shadowed figure standing with a weapon, angry, trembling, small despite the gun. On the right, a little girl in a wheelchair, surrounded by light, holding a pencil like a sword. Below it, in bold, handwritten block letters, "Some fight with fear. I fight with truth." And then she looked out over the crowd and raised her hand. Not a wave, a salute. To the audience. To her father. To every child who ever felt helpless in the face of cruelty. The auditorium erupted. A standing ovation. Some cried. Many just stared, stunned by the gravity of what they'd witnessed. Not a performance, not a protest, but a quiet declaration of power. That single moment turned Ava into something bigger than a survivor. She became a symbol. The media picked it up. Headlines shifted from gun violence in suburbia to art as resistance. Her drawing was reprinted in magazines. Schools reached out to ask if they could use it for disability inclusion posters. And every time someone asked for permission, Ava would just nod and write the word, yes. Meanwhile, Karen's world continued to shrink. Her lawyer filed for early parole 6 months later. Denied. She claimed she had found faith in prison. But her letters to the court betrayed something else, still blaming us. Still claiming targeted harassment and character assassination. She hadn't changed. She had just lost. The public, however, had changed. Neighbors who once rolled their eyes at accessibility issues were now organizing ramps and inclusive parks. People started asking better questions. Why was Karen allowed to escalate for so long? Why do we minimize harassment when it's cloaked in HOA rules? Why do we doubt quiet people more than loud ones? One retired military colonel wrote an op-ed that went viral. This wasn't just about a child or a gun or a neighbor. This was about power, the kind that hides behind gates, fake smiles, and petty complaints. And how sometimes the most powerful response is stillness. Ava's drawing ended up being displayed in the state capitol. Her school gave her a citizenship award, but she didn't care about any of that. She only ever asked us one thing. Can I sit on the porch again? We said yes, but this time we joined her. Every evening. Together. Sometimes she sketched, sometimes we just sat in silence. And sometimes, only sometimes, she'd look at us, smile wide, and say the single word she'd practiced quietly when no one was looking safe. And that's when we knew we had won. Not because Karen was behind bars, not because the world finally saw her for what she was, but because Ava, our daughter, felt safe again. And when safety returns to a child who's lost it, that's real justice. Time doesn't heal everything, but it gives us space to rebuild. 6 months after the incident, Ava returned to the sidewalk where it all happened, not to relive the pain, but to redraw it. She sat in her new wheelchair, sketchbook on her lap, watching the light filter through the trees. Her hand moved slowly, intentional, confident, not sketching the gun. Not the panic, just the trees. The same trees that stood silently through it all. They hadn't moved. Neither had she. That was her strength. That was her message. She wasn't a victim. She was a witness. And now she was a voice. Karen was never spoken of in our house again. Not by name. Not by memory. We left her behind like an old shadow on the wall, one that only exists when you turn your back to the light. What mattered now was Ava's peace, her laughter soft but growing, Her art now bolder. Her drawings, now colored in ways we hadn't seen before, sunsets, oceans, constellations. Things far beyond the street she once feared. She began mentoring younger children with disabilities at the local community center. No one asked her to. She just showed up one day, sketchbook in hand, and sat beside a boy with tremors who couldn't hold a pencil straight. She didn't teach him how to draw. She showed him how to try. My husband often says that some wars never make the news. They aren't fought in deserts or jungles or foreign soil. They're fought on porches, in playgrounds, in courtrooms. Wars between fear and decency, between silence and justice. And sometimes they're fought with nothing but patience, proof, and love. That's what won this one. Not rank, not revenge, just a father who stood still, a mother who watched everything, and a daughter who never stopped drawing. Call TO Action if this story moved you. If you've ever witnessed injustice, cruelty, or abuse of power, then let Ava's story remind you. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to fight to win. Sometimes the strongest force in the room is the one that refuses to fall. Backhand Index Pointing Right subscribe to the HOA stories for more true, powerful tales from across the world, where ordinary people face extraordinary challenges and find the courage to rise. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it, because silence didn't protect Ava, but telling her story might protect the next child.